1884, The Light of the Nations by Charles F. Deems, pastor of the Church of Strangers, New York, and president of the American Institute of Christian Philosophy, author of The Home Altar, What Now, Weights and Wings, etc., and editor of Christian Thought, as illustrated on the meme. He's editor of a couple other things, and he was author of even more books. And he was known for trying to get people into a more traditional view of Christianity. Because he saw a lot of Pentecostal churches and stuff like this. Yep, 1884. Introduction. Important to be read before going forward. After all that has been written for and against Jesus, there are millions who now believe that he is the light of the nations. Well, for the most part, it's for or against Christianity. There's a difference. So, important, a historical figure deserves repeated examination in the light of successive generations and of accumulating scientific skill and research. Now, the Christian Jesus, I don't know if you can say that he's less than 4 historical characters, combined with some prevailing types of mythology at the time. The law which an author sets to himself in the composition of a book must be known before proper criticism can begin. If this volume or any portion of it be judged as if I had attempted a life of Christ, the most grievous misapprehension of the volume and its author may be made. It is no more such a book than it is a volume of sermons or poems. It carefully abstains from being a life of Christ. A life of Christ necessarily starts with the assumption that Jesus was Christ. It must be dogmatic and can be useful mainly to Christians. I have assumed no such thing, nor have I assumed in this book that the original biographers, the 4 evangelists, and Paul were inspired. I simply assume that their books are as trustworthy as those of Herodotus and Xenophon, of Tacitus and Caesar. They write about the man Jesus, who was the son of Mary. They preserve memorabilia of his acts and words. I deal with these evangelic biographers as I would with those classical authors. I strive to make a harmonious narrative from the records and to ascertain what was the consciousness of Jesus as he performed each act and spoke each word according to the laws of thought so far as they are known to me. This book must not be judged from any theologic standpoint. If my views of theology are of any importance, they must be sought in my sermons, not here. There will be found in this book a new translation of the sayings of Jesus. The ordinary rule in such cases is not to make a literal rendering of each word by its synonym in the tongue into which it is transferred, but to represent the idioms of one language by those of another. I have departed from that canon because all who read this book will have in their hands the common version which generally does that work for them. The translations here are furnished different from those in the common version. Notice I made 2 mistakes. In being usually almost strictly literal, and they have been purposely made so that such of my readers as are unacquainted with the original may have an opportunity to compare a literal with an idiomatic version. My renderings from the Greek must be judged by scholars in the light of this statement. Well, not only the Catholic Septuagint, which is actually what we have, but other Bibles or versions of the Bibles have been very leading in their translations. The language employed by Jesus was what is called the Palestinian Aramaic, which is also called Hebrew by early ecclesiastical writers. See, it was called Aramea in its own script, but according to Papias, Irenaeus, Origen, Eusebius, and Jerome, Matthew's Gospel was written in that language. Matthew may have written also the Greek version of his own Gospel. The books of Mark and Luke and John were written in Greek, a language which is probable that Jesus sometimes employed. The autographs of these 4 books are supposed to have perished, and so have all the copies made in the first 3 centuries. Well, there are some, and now we know that John in the 90s, and then Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I think Luke was before Matthew, but Matthew. Yeah, between 120 and 150 were the first known manuscripts. So this presumption, and there are also clues in those Gospels themselves that it wasn't contemporaries. But in addition to the usual causes for the disappearance of books, we may mention in this case a thorough manner in which were executed the decrees of Diocletian in the beginning of the 4th century, in February 303 of the Common Era, for the destruction of all the sacred books of the Christians, for the purpose of extirpating the superstition, as he called it. Well, there's 80 side Gospels, and you have manuscripts from every generation following those first documents. So they're, notwithstanding the severe penalties which impelled every magistrate to execute those decrees, some copies escaped the flames. The Diocletian persecution closed 313 of the Common Era. Constantine, the first Christian emperor, ascended the throne in 324 of the Common Era. In 328 of the Common Era, he called Eusebius, who had been banished, and in a letter which Eusebius quotes in his life of Constantine, the emperor directed him to cause 50 copies of the sacred scriptures to be written on prepared parchment in a legible manner and in a commodious and portable form by transcribers thoroughly practiced in the art. The completion of this work Constantine acknowledged in a subsequent letter to Eusebius. One of those copies, or perhaps the oldest copy of one of them, is in the property of the Emperor of Russia. It is called the Codex Sinaiticus because found in a convent on Mount Sinai by Tischendorf, a learned German. That copy, being the oldest extant, is the basis of my translation. Whenever, therefore, the reader finds any of the words of Jesus in this book different from those in the common version, he will understand that he is thereby carried nearer to the fountainhead of the literature produced by Jesus and his utterances. The difference in the characteristics of the 4 authors, commonly called the evangelists, is worthy of note. Matthew was a practical man of business, Mark was an aesthetic observer, Luke had a scientific bias, and John was devoutly metaphysical. We are permitted to see Jesus as he presented himself to 4 such students of his acts and character. Our skill is to be exercised in combining their impressions. It is a great advantage to have a subject placed in so many different lights. Jesus was the founder of a faith. He lived centuries ago. The most diverse claims have been made for his person and his teachings. Almost every saying of his has become the basis of a dogma. It will not be wonderful, then, that historians come upon actions and utterances of his which involve difficulties. Some of these are still difficulties to me. In such cases, I have frankly said, I do not understand this. So it would be, I think, with any other honest student and fair writer. By this candor, I cannot lose the esteem of those whose esteem is worth having, but I have not avoided the hard places. Timid readers may wish I had. Wherever there seemed to me to be an explanation, I have given it. It may satisfy some. It may lead others to discover what is more satisfactory to themselves. In no case, I believe, will unlearned readers of good sense be perplexed, and in no case, I trust, will scholars be scandalized. There has been no ambition to appear learned to those who were not acquainted with the languages in which the evangelists wrote, are the languages in which learned men have commented on these works. I have endeavored to make the way plain by all needed helps, nor has there been an ambition of originality. Wherever I have used the labors of others, I have given credit, so far as I recollect. If any failure on this point has occurred, it has been through inadvertence. To repair that and to send students to the sources of my own stream of information, I have supplied a list of the books used in the preparation of this volume. I have read up in the literature of the subject as well as I could. All writers on this subject have difficulty with the chronology. In this book, the terminal points of birth and death, I think, are trustworthy, especially the latter, but many of the incidents in the life have been arranged in an order which I have seen reason to change several times. The result of my investigation is the conviction that it is not now in the power of human skill to arrange a harmony of the facts in this biography, which should be positively asserted to be the precise order in which they occurred. Here and there are some that we know preceded one the other. There can be no doubt as to the order of the baptism, the temptation, the Sermon on the Mount, the Transfiguration, etc., but minor incidents puzzle every chronologer. The historical and biographical groupings in this book, as it goes to the printer, are the last result of my most careful study and have been adopted in no instance simply for picturesque effect. It is proper to say that almost all the spots which Jesus made memorable by his personal presence have been visited by the author during a sojourn of several months in the Holy Land. He has thus had what aid geography can give to his history, and so has verified the topographical statements in this book. In the preparation of these pages, I am sure that there has been no ambition of novelty, but I have not been afraid of new things, nor has any opinion commended itself to me because it was old. On the other hand, novelty has been no recommendation, and antiquity no disparagement. I have sought to know the truth when I believed I had found it. I wrote it and now publish it without stopping to inquire whether these honest opinions will please or displease, or whether they put Jesus at an advantage or disadvantage. In this I have sought to imitate the spirit and style of the evangelists. A man would be sadly stupid who should spend some years on a subject which, more than any other, has engrossed a study of thoughtful men, without improving the opinions he formed in earlier life on less investigation. The preparation of this book has been to me its own exceeding great reward. Now, as people get older, their formations take longer. Their changes to the formations take longer. But with the time and effort comes greater reward, right? As far as practicable, I have laid aside all dogmatic prepossessions, but in writing this book, I have been preparing a memoir of my dearest friend, and if, for that friend's sake, and in the spirit of that friend, I have dealt with all the records most honestly, it is fair to state that I have treated them with the reverence of manly love, and whatever may be the final decision of my readers, I conclude this work with a love for Jesus deeper and better than that which I feel for any other man, living or dead. I have a final request. When my readers shall have read the whole book and have attempted to answer the closing question on the 710th page, they will do themselves and me a favor if they will return to this page and answer this question. If such a case can be made out by a rational examination of the four evangelists on the ground that their memoirs are merely human in all respects, who is Jesus on the further supposition that those memoirs are divinely inspired records? My own belief is that they are inspired. The belief receives fresh confirmation from every examination of these books. Well, it's not all that stuff about investigating and hearing things, and some stuff was like third hand, and um, that's not inspiration. That's, compiling a sacred history is a noble act in itself, but well, it can be, anyways. On this grave subject, I would not have myself misunderstood. It is because I am so thoroughly satisfied in my belief in the inspiration of these records that I have felt so safe in resting the argument of this volume on a basis which does not include that high claim. Charles F. Deems, Chapel of the Church of Strangers, something, Winthrop Place, New York. And one of the things that we should look at with stuff is, do you have to be of a faith to be benefited by something? I think when I talked about the 33 ways to experience and perform your horizons better, I think, one doesn't have to be Muslim to, get at least some of those lessons, right? And the same thing here, if they're trying to transfer some good or truth, and they actually do, it doesn't matter whether the person's Christian or not. But I've mentioned recently, in English, we confuse things like angel and prophet and apostle and inspiration and revelation and, various things. We even completely despiritualize the terms. So it's important to be a little bit more direct sometimes in referring to words, the originals.